In the summer of 1911, a family was found brutally murdered with an axe in their sleep. Then, another family, and another. From Oregon to Kansas, the terror spread as the unknown killer left families slaughtered near railway lines across the Midwest. They called him Billy the Axeman, a specter that drifted through small towns, leaving no witnesses, no clues, only a hauntingly unmistakable pattern. Could this all be the work of one man? What caused him to commit such horrific crimes? Join us as we embark on a dark journey into the story of one of the Midwest's most chilling mysteries. Together, we will explore the tale of the Midwest Axeman, who may actually be the most prolific serial killer in American history. In the early 1900s, small communities across the Midwest were terrorized by a mysterious killer who brutally slaughtered entire families while they slept. This person or persons would break into family homes in the middle of the night, attack his victims with an axe, cover and move the bodies, and vanish back into the darkness. It's a story marked by fear, horror, and many unanswered questions. Who was this terrifying monster, and what compelled him to leave a trail of bodies in his wake? Join me as we journey into the past and uncover the haunting legend of the Midwest Axeman. In the late 1800s, the American Midwest was the beating heart of the nation's agricultural economy. Small towns and farming communities flourished, with railroads crisscrossing the landscape and exporting commodities across the nation. But as cities began to grow, these once bustling small farm towns became isolated. Isolation was precisely what the Midwest Axeman used to his advantage. Our story begins in Ardenwald, Oregon on June 9, 1911. It was here that William and Ruth Hill, along with Ruth's children, Philip and Dorothy, were found brutally murdered in their beds. The family had been killed during the night, and the killer left the murder weapon, a bloodied axe, behind. The details were shocking. The bodies had been moved and covered, and the windows were carefully shrouded with cloth. Investigators discovered signs of post-mortem sexual assault on both female victims. Despite an initial arrest, no one was ever convicted, and the case remained unsolved. The horror that gripped Ardenwald was only the beginning. Exactly 1 month later, on July 9th, Archie and Nettie Coble were found murdered in their beds in Rainier, Washington. Just like the Hill family, they'd been killed with an axe, bodies covered, and windows draped. Once again, there were no signs of robbery. As authorities examined the scene, they couldn't ignore the similarities between the two murders. Could the same killer be responsible for both horrific crimes? A few months later, in September, the terror continued in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Two families, the Burnhams and the Waynes, were found murdered next door to one another. All victims had been killed with a blunt weapon, their bodies and windows covered with sheets. Both families had been visiting for tuberculosis treatment and had been murdered only a few days after their arrival. The homes were located near a local railroad line, which prompted authorities to consider a terrifying possibility. The murderer could be traveling by train. This would make it all too easy for this killer to quickly slip in and out of town undetected. The next killings took place in Monmouth, Illinois, later that same month. The Dawson family, William, his wife, and their daughter, were found murdered, their bodies and windows covered, and again near a railroad line. A discarded gas pipe, along with a flashlight inscribed with Colorado Springs, suggested the same suspect had been responsible for both massacres. The pipe and flashlight were found near a pond just off a railway line intersection. In October, the killer struck again in Kansas. The Showman family was murdered in Ellsworth, near the railroad, with their bodies staged and covered. William and Paulina Showman, along with their 3 young children, had been murdered, and Pauline's body was staged in a sexually suggestive manner. The local marshal awoke the next day to see that someone had removed the screen from one of his windows and had attempted to pry the window open, but was unsuccessful. The marshal's home was closest to the railroad line, and were his window not harder to pry open, he and his family might not have woken up that morning. Bloodhounds traced the killer's scent to the intersection of 2 railway lines. Just like that, this shadow of the night had once again vanished. Inexplicably but fortunately, the killer temporarily went quiet. Then, on June 5, 1912, the Axeman returned. Rollin and Anna Hudson were found dead in Paola, Kansas, their murder following the same modus operandi as with the previous crimes. The very same night, the 𝖒𝖊𝖉𝖎𝖆 home was invaded. The suspect had pried the screen from their window and climbed through. Fortunately, Mrs. 𝖒𝖊𝖉𝖎 awoke after the intruder mistakenly broke a glass lamp, and upon being discovered, he fled the scene. The press dubbed this mysterious killer Billy the Axeman, and the terror continued to mount. The legend of the Midwest Axeman was spreading fast, but it was the infamous Valisa Axe Murders in Iowa that secured this story's place in true crime history. On June 9, 1912, the Moore family, consisting of parents Josiah and Sarah, along with their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, were murdered in their home in Valisa. Lena and Ina Stillinger, who were friends with the Moore children, were staying in the home for a sleepover, and they also tragically lost their lives. After seeing no activity inside or outside the home the next morning, a concerned neighbor called Josiah's brother. Once inside, they found a scene all too familiar. Blunt force trauma to the head caused by the dull end of an axe, bodies posed and covered, windows draped, and all valuables left untouched. This time, the killer had taken care to cover each mirror in the home. Lena Stillinger's body was posed in a sexual manner, similar to that of Pauline Showman the year prior. Without raising any alarm from the neighbors, this killer was able to enter the home, brutally murder 8 people, and escape into the night without a trace. This pattern of murders was becoming increasingly clear, yet the brutality didn't end in the Midwest. Texas and Louisiana saw a string of similar murders from 1911 to 1912, known as the Mulatto Axe Murders. This time, the victimology deviated, as black and mixed-race families were killed, whereas only white families had been murdered in the Midwest. Many of the victims of the Mulatto Axe Murders lived along railroads. Was this the work of a copycat, or did the Axeman's reign stretch further than anyone imagined? Author Todd White believes the latter. According to his investigation, the MO of the Mulatto Axe Murders was shockingly similar to the cases spread across the Midwest. Notably, the periods of inactivity of the Midwest Axe Murderer coincided with the periods of the Mulatto Axe Murders. White asserts that a lone killer is to blame for both series of murders, which would make this killer one of the most prolific of all time in an era before the term serial killer had been coined. In 2017, author Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCarthy James published their book, The Man from the Train. Beginning with Bill's investigation of the Valisa Axe Murders, he felt that only an experienced criminal could have pulled off the atrocity of Valisa. From there, he began searching through newspapers from that time period to find similar cases that might have been forgotten by history. Employing Rachel's help in his research, the pair uncovered old newspapers detailing murders of families back to 1898. the Jameses were able to map out the timeline of the murders, and in doing so, they identified 11 cases that they felt certain could be attributed to a single killer, along with 13 other probable cases. They noted 30 specific items of interest that were common in every murder they investigated, pointing to an ultra-specific MO and a singular suspect. Their investigation indicated that this killer may have murdered over 100 victims, making him the most prolific serial killer in all of American history. But who was this mysterious murderer? While there have been many suspects identified over the years, the Jameses have a theory on who they believe was responsible. Their research led them to Paul Mueller, a German immigrant. Mueller was a carpenter and a lumberjack, making him skilled with an axe. He is described as having a short but muscular build, giving him both the strength to commit the murders with a heavy weapon and the stature to climb through windows. They even speculate that he might have continued his killing spree abroad, linking him to the 1922 𝖘𝖔𝖈𝖎𝖑 murders in Germany, a brutal case where a family was slain with an axe, eerily echoing the Axeman's methods. In the 𝖘𝖘𝖈𝖎𝑑 farm murders, the family heard strange noises from the attic in the days leading up to their death. It is widely believed that the perpetrator of the Valisa Axe murders hid in the family's attic prior to the attack. Could the 𝖘𝖘𝖈𝖎𝑑 case be the work of Mueller, extending his reign of terror from America back to his home country? In The Man from the Train, the authors position Mueller as the primary suspect for the Midwest Axeman murders, as well as the Valisa Axe murders and one of the Mulatto Axe murders. They suspect a copycat or multiple copycats perpetrated the remainder of the cases in Texas and Louisiana. Was Paul Mueller the mysterious Midwest Axeman? Could he also have been responsible for the still unsolved 𝖘𝖘𝖈𝖎𝑑 murders? Or was Billy the Axeman nothing more than a grim legend and actually the work of numerous killers operating in the same time period? There are far too many similarities in many of the cases to chalk it all up to coincidence. It seems highly likely that a single suspect, potentially Mueller, was responsible for many of the tragic murders that terrorized America. Some theorize that there were multiple killers at work, while others, like John White, point to a singular suspect. Unfortunately, forensic technologies were not available in the early 1900s, and today there are many questions that remain unanswered. The facts have been presented, and now it's up to you. Do you believe there were multiple killers operating with the same MO at the same time? Or do you think America was facing one of the most monstrous killers of all time? Let us know by leaving a comment. Though the truth may be lost to history, the gruesome legacy of the Midwest Axeman, a shadowy figure who preyed on families in the night, continues to haunt us. One thing remains certain. The horrifying story of the Midwest Axeman stands as yet another tale from the underworld. Thanks for listening to Tales from the Underworld. If you're fascinated by the stories we uncover, make sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. For even more exclusive content, head over to our website at talesfromtheunderworld.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You'll get insider access to deeper case details, early updates on new episodes, and more true crime content sent straight to your inbox. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay out of the shadows.